Thank you, that's very kind. We've got about half an hour for question and answer, and I'm going to be joined by Dame Lynne Owens, Deputy Commissioner, former Director General of the National Crime Agency, a big figure in policing over a very long time, and I'm privileged to...
Not that big.
Yeah. My wife tells me about my tact and diplomacy, and I'm very privileged to work alongside her. So I think Lynn's going to try and compare this, and I have an ulterior motive as well. So any hard questions I'm going to leave to Lynne to answer.
Of course, what the Commissioner has actually missed is in comparing this, I get to decide who answers, not him. So we may actually find it's the other way round. It's a great privilege to be with you all this evening. We are entirely clear that we have a plan, but it is only a plan that we can deliver in partnership with literally everybody in this room. So the next half hour is so important to us as we hear your views on everything that the Commissioner has said, because it has to be something that we all believe in and we build together. We've sneakily got a couple of people who I know are prepared to ask questions, because there's always that awkward moment at the beginning. So delighted to go first to a member of our community from Bromley, one of the people who supports our neighbourhood policing teams with the ward panel, and I know that you've given some thought to something that you might like to ask the Commissioner and I. Thank you.
Very much. Good evening.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. As a chair of a Safer Neighbourhood board, your renewed commitment to neighbourhood policing is very much welcomed. And I know that visible policing is something that the community have banged on about for years and years. So more officers is a delight to hear. Alongside that, though, the changes that occurred in your estate strategy over the last few years and the removal of police stations and bases not only had a knock-on effect of the confidence that people had in being able to access police or know what was going on, but also in the officers themselves not having the environment, which is perhaps what they needed for their practical policing and also their morale. So it's understanding what your estate strategy will look like in a modern policing world.
That's a very good question, thank you. So I think whenever you change direction, you need to think about how you line everything up behind that ambition, don't you? And so you're exactly right, we are looking afresh at our estate strategy. The latest iteration of it was just coming to its sort of final, almost waiting for signature as I arrived, and the poor guy who's been sort of doing the work on it has then been sort of sent back to the drawing board saying, hang on, we're going in a different direction, so you need to think about what's underneath it. There are a couple of different ways in that. I think we had a decade ago such a messed up estate. There's been a lot of improvements made to it, but there's some things that we probably haven't got quite right. Certainly, there are some of our teams don't have enough office space and some of that stuff that you wouldn't see that's important. But secondly, whilst a lot of our big units, it makes sense to brigade them together. If you're a neighbourhood policing officer, to be effective, you need to be within a not that long a walk of your patch. And I think our commitment to that slipped back too far. It's made more complicated by the fact that politicians have been unhelpful. So it's not clear that very rarely happens, I have to say, by sort of changing the ward boundaries in London. So I think we've added about an extra 40 wards in London. So the boundaries have changed. So not only have we probably got our estate strategy slightly wrong on that across sort of affecting quite a number of wards, but also we've now got a different landscape to place across. So that is part of what we're looking to do. I don't think we need to own all the buildings. I'm a great believer in sort of sharing and sort of, I've worked in other forces where we put neighbourhood policing teams alongside in council offices, and that can be very effective. So I think you can get better effect from that way. But having the community police officers proximate to their patch is absolutely critical. So I fully agree with you.
So open up to the broader audience. Testing. Yes, please. Yeah, can you catch?
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, Ma'am, Sir. In our effort to understand data and science in policing, could I ask for a commitment, please, to look at the impact of neurodiversity, not only on our staff, but also the fact that how it drives crime in London? Just the stat that 1 in 4 in prison have got ADHD, and that's the amount of people that are diagnosed. The estimates are upwards of 75%. And the crime that's being committed is because of that condition, because of the dopamine, because of the desire to get that. If we can understand that as a police force, then that will contribute to reducing crime. I'll just ask for a commitment to look into that, please. That'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
interested
you.
in that. And only a couple of weeks ago, I sat down and had a coffee with, there's I wish I could remember her name, there's one of the Federation reps, there's a lady on the Federation.
Suzanne.
Sorry?
Suzanne?
Suzanne, thank you. I sat down with her and she was talking about a Federation perspective on what they've seen and in terms of how we get it wrong inside the organisation. Sometimes we're treating people where we rush into misconduct of the processes when it's actually about neurodiversity. And that sort of, this links back to the comment I made earlier really about the sort of the range of people we need to hire as police officers in the future. Some of the people we're going to want to hire to be detectives in the fraud and cyber world, there's probably a great proportion of people with sort of wider neurodiversity who we're hiring in that world. One of the things that strike, and that might sound odd, but if you've worked, as a few of us in the room have, say with GCHQ, a very sort of analytical, data-heavy environment, they've been very clever about getting the best people and not having selection processes and HR processes which put off the people who have got exactly those sort of data skills that they're looking for, whose sort of character may not be quite in the mainstream, but they're still fantastic members of staff, and they found a way to do that, and we're going to need to be more creative about those sort of areas.
Yes, they're an incredibly powerful tool, and it'd be great to we can work together and maybe the groups in the Met be able to have a meeting and talk about this, because there's a lot of good people that want to make that change. So,
Thank you.
Mom, thank you.
It's also worth us just reflecting. Sir Mark spoke about the new performance framework. We've done some brilliant things in London where we've bared down on violence, but of course we've bared down on violence at the time when actually confidence in the Met has been decreasing. So we are clear that our performance needs to cover all of the areas that across the 3 areas that you see above you. One of the things that we're going to try and do now is something we haven't done before, which is look at the disproportionality of outcomes and how they land both in different communities and with different sectors of different communities. Because actually you can hide a whole load of ills by looking at some very high level performance data, and actually whether it's disability or people from our black community or indeed some of the service that you've seen in London to violence against women and girls, actually if you narrow it down, it takes you to some different conclusions. So that is, once we've got our data sorted, which is still a work in progress, but once we've got our data sorted, looking at disproportionality within outcomes is going to be a real focus for us.
Thank you, Mom. Thank you, sir.
There was a question from a lady up in the back there. I think it's 3rd row back.
There's a lady over on the right as well.
Hello, thank you. Neighbourhood policing, very, very important to all of us, and residents and the police in themselves. There's so many vacancies that are not being filled, and then when they are filled or when they're not filled, then the neighbourhood teams are being abstracted to response. And I talk to everybody on the ground. I'm the head of membership for Neighbourhood Watch for the country, and I talk to people on the ground. They don't see the police because the police aren't there to be seen, because they are abstracted, and this is a problem that we have especially within London because of the large events, the large protests, etc. And I'd love to find out what the plan is, because I know in my area, because I'm also the chair of the Safe Neighbourhood Board where I am, that we have so many vacancies, especially with the new wards. We've got 6 new wards, and that's a lot of policing to make up. And I see the best way of moving forward with trust is making sure that people see their officers and they're not abstracted. There's officers that I remember for the Queen's funeral that were capable officers that were in offices that were begging to come out and be abstracted to come and help, rather than the neighbourhood policing officers.
So it's a brilliant question. I could genuinely talk for half an hour on this topic. You're all going to say, Lynne, you do need to get out a bit more. Firstly, can I say thank you for doing the work that you're doing in Neighbourhood Watch and as the Ward Panel Chair. We know how critical you are to our future success. And a challenge like the one you've just laid at our door is something we do really need to hear. So where to start on that question? So the first thing to say is that everywhere, so Mark and I go, our frontline officers and staff say we are under establishment. Now, that might sound perverse because not everywhere can be under establishment, but there is some urgent work, and in fact we were only discussing it at a meeting today, about how we better understand where some of our people are. And you will have heard Sir Mark talk previously about understanding those who can be deployed, who are deployable, and some of that has been presented inaccurately and definitely received by our officers and staff inaccurately. So to be clear, of the people that are restricted from deployment at any one time, some of them are restricted because they're under misconduct investigation. Some will get the sack and some will return to work because they'll be found not guilty. Some of them are restricted because they have temporary disabilities that they will recover from, and some of them have permanent disabilities, but there are roles within the organisation that we can use them for constructively. So you've got that group of people. We have a way of counting people in the organisation that creates a pool of people who aren't deployable or it isn't entirely clear where they are. And of course, at any one time, we've got about 1,200 people in training. So at a headline, we have between 6,000 and 8,000 people at any one time who aren't deployable on the streets of London in a ward role where they would be visible to you. Now, that's not to say they are not valuable people, because some of them are very valuable, but it needs us as leaders to say, actually, what roles can be done by people who can't be deployed on the streets and what roles can't be. And it's only when we've answered that question that we can confidently assure you that we are going to fill the posts that we want to. And that is an absolute focus. We were pushing the teams hard today on driving the timescale for that because we know how important it is to you. So Mark covered the point about extra wards. We are talking to the Mayor and the Mayor's office about the budget for this year and how we make sure those extra wards have the right level of coverage. And then lastly, on aid. There's been some brilliant work done by our people that look at aid centrally. And you are right, for the tragedy of Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, we did manage to get about 30% of the people that policed that, as well as those from came across the country. The Met people that paced it were non-BCU people. So we're now trying to read across that model, so it isn't always frontline policing that bears the brunt of the aid requirements into London. The second thing we're doing, which sounds very bureaucratic and boring, but it is important, is we're challenging our public order commanders about the level of aid they set for every event. Now, not all of you will know this, but I bear some scars from 2011, which is when we had the riots. If we're going to be braver with the number of people that we deploy to public order events and incidents, we have to be really confident that those people are operationally deployable from BCUs, because if we have to press the button, we have to be really confident that they're going to come. That's a long answer, a long way of saying we know that for neighbourhood policing to be effective, you need to have visible, known, engaged police officers, police community support officers who are well supervised and absolutely dedicated to their patch. And we want to get to the place where we can assure you completely that they won't be turned over. The other thing that we're looking at, and we haven't decided the answer on yet, is about rotation. So some of you in the room will be people who have seen different versions of how we recruit and train in London. At the moment, some of our probationary constables, so our newest in-service police officers, spend some time on neighbourhoods and some time on response, and have been sometimes counted in the establishment of neighbourhood posts. And again, both from their perspective, because it's not been entirely clear who supervises them, but most importantly from the community perspective, you just get to know someone and they move on. So in the work that Louisa Rolfe, our Assistant Commissioner for Frontline Policing, is leading for us, trying to find a way through all that murk so that we can honour Sir Mark's commitment, our commitment to all of you, is where we seek to get to. Anything else you want to add, Mark?
No. So the short answer is we'll go from a world where we've got resources on paper that aren't on the ground to where the promise and what's on the ground are the same, and the promise will get bigger.
So I have two on this side of the room and one over here. So this lady just here.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation and your outline plan for London. My name is Alexia Smith, and I'm the chair of the Safe for Neighbourhood Board in Southwark, and also an independent advisor, and also a trainee for the new recruits. Now, my question, which Dame Lynne touched on briefly, is about, you talk about how you want to improve and you want to do more for Londoners and for the community, but the government, the mayor, is always cutting funding for the Met and for the community. How are you going to guarantee that the funding is not going to be cut and you'll be able to increase your workforce, your officers, and also to acknowledge officers that when they do things, I know you mentioned about the officer that was attempted murder, but also officers who do things in the community, and 1 minute the community slag them off, 90% slag them off, and then the other, say 10%, they don't talk about when they have to save someone's life. Because 2 weeks ago, 2 of your officers saved a young man's life, and if it wasn't for those officers, he would be dead.
So the financial issue, and thank you first of all, thank you for everything you do. You're obviously really busy doing lots of things to help us and how we connect to communities. So that's really, really appreciated. The money issue, that's why I put it on the table in the speech, that I think we are systematically, over a long period, spending less on policing in this country than other countries are. And so whether you do national comparisons, England and Wales, or whether you do like big city comparisons with New York, the numbers come out sort of 20, 30, 40, 50% lighter. And over the last decade, I think our work has got harder. The fact that there is so much more confidence and trust now to report sexual offences is both fantastic and massively challenging. So I think rape reports have maybe tripled in the last decade. Research tends to show only maybe 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 cases reported. So there's a lot of spare unreported stuff to report, and that's great that comes forward. Our ability to build the capacity to deal with all of those allegations as well as we would like to has not been as good as we'd like it to be. And you've seen not dissimilar increases in sexual assault reporting and domestic abuse, etc. And that's stretched us. So there's been some things like that, and then cybercrime and fraud, which we all see with spam emails and things, and we all know people who've been sucked into that, and it's really can have very tragic effects. So all of that extra work is another factor for me in this equation. So that's why I'm speaking tonight and starting to talk about reform of policing. Now, because what I don't want to say to government is, and it's to government, it's mayors, it's PCCs, I say just give us more money to keep working as we are, because the world is changing fast and we need to change to keep up with it. But what I'm saying is, if you want us to be as good as we all want to be, and communities and great people like you want us to be, then there's a lot that we can do, but actually we need some help. And some of that's changing the way policing's organised or the way officers are rewarded and all that sort of thing. And some of it's about actually the amount of capacity we have in the system, which is obviously dependent on money. So it's about starting that in a sort of mature way. It's not about saying, give me a load of money tomorrow. It's more about saying over the next few years, if we want policing to be as good as it can be, those are the sort of changes we need.
Thank you. Another question down here.
Thank you. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you so much. I understand each BCU is going to get a dedicated LGBT plus officer, which is brilliant news. I do a lot of work in terms of advocacy for the LGBT plus community, both with the Met. I sit on various forums and IAG. One of the things I wanted to ask you is the highest increase in hate crime in the last year was transphobic hate crime, which went up 56% compared to other hate crimes. We know that transphobic hate crime is incredibly underreported, very rarely prosecuted because of that reason. So what can the Met do, not only to make people within the Met staff feel comfortable to come out as trans, but also just for the public? That's my question.
Yeah, so I mean, hate crime is obviously particularly toxic. To be victimised because of who you are and what you are is is obviously one of the most unpleasant types of crime. And it is absolutely a priority for us. It is clear we've got some cases wrong, and that hasn't helped our relationship with LGBT communities. And that's a very big challenge for us. And as we're looking at our culture internally, as I said, we've got tens of thousands of great men and women in the organisation, but we know we have too much prejudice in the organisation. We haven't been tough enough on it, and we've talked about sort of racism, misogyny, homophobia, etc. So all of that is on our list of things to do, and we don't take it lightly. That's why this is a big reform programme. There aren't any immediate sort of silver bullets to this, but we're absolutely committed to it because the trust and confidence of all Londoners is so important. And when you look at the last few years where those numbers have started to go consistently over 3 or 4 years in the wrong direction, not only Lynne's point earlier about averages dropping, troublingly, but those communities with lowest trust and confidence have dropped further, and that certainly applies to black communities and other diverse communities such as those you're talking about. So it's very much focused in our mind, and that's why in our performance measures we don't just want to look at headline averages, we want to look at those who have the lowest trust or the highest victimisation and focus some of our effort on those cases.
Thank you. Gentleman over here in the green tie.
Hello, hi. I'm from Haringey. I chair the Safer Neighbourhood Board there and on the IAG as an LGBT plus advisor. I was really pleased to hear what you were saying about your commitment to safer neighbourhoods, and it's nice to hear colleagues around the room who do the same job as I do. One of the questions I've got is around recruitment, retention and morale. Those of us who work on the ground with our local officers see police officers every day going that extra mile, and it does happen. You know, it's understandable that the media pick up on negative, all the negative stuff that is highlighted around policing. But how do you publicise the good news stories? There's lots of them around, and in turn it'll have a knock-on effect on morale.
Yep, so go on, do you want to do this one?
So I think our ability to get out to all of you and much more broadly about the brilliant work that goes in, day out by officers and staff of the Met is something we just need to work so much harder on and need to have much more confidence in. I think we've been a little bit cautious, and we're almost a bit shy, we're a bit humble about telling our own good news. I don't know if any of you saw it, but a month or so ago, there was a brilliant message put on social media it was actually on Islington Borough, about a great piece of work where a couple of officers went to stop some people. One of them made off, and the female officer detained this guy who was found to have a machete down his leg. And I don't know if anyone from Islington's here today, but the Islington Borough commander just took the initiative, tweeted it, and it sort of went global. And I had the privilege of going and seeing the officers and thanking them, and of course they were completely, nothing to see here, we were just doing our job, pleased that you popped out, and that's what makes us so optimistic about the future. But we do need to get to a place where actually we are talking with safer neighbourhood panels, with safer neighbourhood teams, we're talking through comms channels locally. We shouldn't only be reliant, however much we love them, on the traditional media, have an important role in holding us to account. But there is another side of the story there, and I know the traditional media would also say that to some extent the Met's taken a bit of a backward step. We used to be much better at getting the media alongside some of our big investigations, some of our more difficult pieces of work, and if we can give our senior investigating officers more confidence to speak with candour about what they're doing and why they're doing it, then as well as holding us to account, they will also run those stories. But we completely agree, finding a way to allow our officers and staff to very visibly see how much their work is valued is essential, both to community confidence but also to their own sense of worth and value. There was a lady just behind you who had a question.
Thank you very much. My name's Carleen Lee Parkway, Cabinet Member for Crime Community Safety in Newham. and I am one of those politicians that you refer to with a small p. So I guess what I wanted to just reflect on is some things that you said earlier, Sir Mark, in regards to the reforms of the police force and what that looks like. And when we think about trust and confidence, how can the partnership, that being the police, councils, voluntary faith sector and others, work together to truly build the trust and confidence in environments like mine in Newham? How is that really going to happen in reality?
So I think one of the challenges of the last decade has been that crime and disorder partnerships and some of that local work in some boroughs, I'm just not thinking about London, I think across the country, in some areas it's remained strong, but in many areas, as budgets have got tighter for both sides, and I know local authorities have been hit harder than policing has, that sort of budget issue has led to a sort of a retreating. I know we've seen some local authorities in London, for example, disinvesting in things like CCTV, and I know when we look at ourselves at the moment, if we're honest, we're not as good at connecting into local authorities. Our commitment to that as part of neighbourhood policing for me is our ability to connect in and work together and solve problems. So I think from both sides of that relationship, we need to sort of recommit to that and invest in it. We're looking at some ways we can make amendments to our leadership structures around BCUs to put more resources invested in being able to make those relationships work and that capacity. I think that's really important. I think the rest of it is, some of it's obvious, but it's difficult. It's about having shared data. It's having access to what are the biggest problems, agreeing what the biggest priorities are, because we both need to focus, and then getting around the table, us and yourselves and community members, and working out the best way of tackling it. I think it needs a renewed vigour into the crime disorder partnerships. I think they've been in place now for roughly 25 years. I think there are periods of time where they've worked really well. This may still be fantastic in Newham or not, I'm not sure, but I think that it has become much more patchwork over the last 10 years. And as we strengthen our footprint in neighbourhoods and we recommit to that, I'd love to work with sort of you and the other borough portfolio leads across London in working out how we connect better and do that together. Thank you.
So I've got one lady here and then a hand right at the back, and that might be our time up. There's quite a few to go. Go on.
Thank you, Sir Mark. My name is Doreen. I am CEO of Elevated Mind CIC. We are a community group who works very well with the police. Improving trust and confidence is so important, especially with the young people. And listening to what you said earlier about neighbourhood policing, it's fantastic that it's going to be far more visible, where you see more officers. I look around the room when I came in and thought, isn't it a shame that there are very few black faces here? You know, you've got these positive messages that you are giving out, and there are not enough of us to receive it and enough of us to comment and to come back and say what we would like to see. But even worse, there are no young people, and very few young people are involved in events like this. So my question to you, Sir Mark, and thank you very much for meeting with the young people we work with, and so you too, Dame Lynne. One of the things they've said is that they like you because you seem to be a man of your word, and they love that you say things and you walk the walk and not just talk the talk, and that's great to hear from young people. And they need to meet you, both people in your position, far more often, so that that trust is built. So how are the police officers in neighbourhoods, as you rightly said, that has got very low trust, going to build that confidence? How is that going to, they're going to start connecting and start engaging and start trusting again?
So that's very kind, the words you've said, and it's always nice to talk to a fellow Brummie if people haven't spotted the accents there. So we're slowly taking over the world between us. There's a lot to do to get our neighbour policing working as well as it can do. There's the abstractions point. There's also the skills point. And I think sort of the areas we've made most progress are where the local teams, and I see Andy Britton here, so the local teams have done work in terms of joint training locally. So the more the local officers understand local community, understand the cultures, and sort of have that strong relationship, the better the work is. And that's most true for our neighbourhood police officers. So I think there's work for us to do together on skills, because I love going to some of these groups and meeting really inspiring young people. But success won't come through me. Success will come through thousands of police officers and PCSOs who have the right effect in their community, and that's the capability we've got to build. And we are going to deliver this, but I'm not going to pretend it's not going to be bumpy on the way. When we've stretched and got our resources in the wrong place, as Lynne said earlier, and we've got to sort of sort that all out, we've got to get our recruits in, we've got to sort of get them trained and skilled in the right way. This is going to be a few bumps on this road over the next sort of months and years, but we are going to do it. And with your help, it being better. So thank you.
So I'm going to take 2 more questions. I have one somewhere in the back there, and then you were trying to get in the middle. This lady in the middle. Okay, lovely. And you'll be the last question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Sir Mark. My name is Charles Aiko. I'm the chair of Met BPA, Met Black Police Association. Your presentation, more trust, less crime, high standards. Absolutely brilliant. And thank you very much, Dame Lynne Owens, for your presentation, eloquently put across. My question revolves around the trust element, which I strongly believe is not London-centric alone, as in just dealing with the Met problem. As you will probably agree with me, we've got the National Race Action Plan. I just wanted to hear your commitment as to how we embed the National Race Action Plan alongside the more trust, less crime, and high standard, purely because it has a significant impact on how myself and my colleagues from along the Met Black Police Association, as well as the National Black Police Association and other staff support associations, reflect the progression, retention, and particularly recruitment of black officers, because at present, we are hemorrhaging them. Thank you.
So I take Mark's feedback from earlier about short answers, not long answers. The short answer to the question is we are absolutely committed to embedding the National Race Action Plan in our programme of work. Helen Harper, who's somewhere here in the audience, a commander, is leading on it for us. Barbara Gray, our Assistant Commissioner, is making sure that it is fully embedded in the performance framework that I spoke to you about earlier. We are looking, there are I think 4 strands in the National Race Action Plan. We definitely want to take the lead in some of those areas, and there is no doubt that if we are going to make the officers and staff of London more connected to our communities, our workforce needs to look more like London. And then, and I know this is the point you're getting to, Charles, when people have joined us, they need to feel valued, they need to feel supported, and they need to be able to progress in the organisation, and it's in some of those areas that we definitely need to improve. But our commitment is wholly there. You will see it reflected in the documents as they are circulated, and we do look forward to working closely with the association and all of your members on making sure that we can truly embed it as something very practical. I think too many of these, there's too many action plans delivered which on policing which have no actual resonance with communities or indeed with officers and staff, and making sure that we've got a series of things that we are doing that really make a difference, that are tangible, is where we want to get to, rather than a 450-page document that's all colour-coded red, amber and green, but never actually changes anything. So that's our commitment to you. Thank you. And your question. Microphone's coming from this side.
Thank you. So, good evening. Relationships between regulars and specials can be complex and challenging. According to a study across the UK, this was about just over a year ago, on the regulars' perspectives of specials, there's a lack of confidence, largely in the difference in the training, for obvious reasons. And however, specials, are in that unique position where they can maybe bridge the gap between the community and the police. So maybe there's a little bit of balance there to maybe sort of change their perspective. And in this particular study, it said that 88% of regulars thought that relationships needed to improve. So I'm just wondering, what is the strategy for the Met? And is there a message that I can take back to my new team that can give us a bit of confidence and encouragement?
So for me, volunteering in its widest sense, working with volunteers, is a big part of successful neighbourhood policing or community policing. Whether that's people working in ward panels, whether that's street pastors. We were with a group of faith leaders this morning, one of whom leads the street pastor schemes across London, or whether that's the more formal volunteering that is the Special Constabulary, which is a sort of uniquely British and amazing sort of thing that we have that I don't think anybody else in the world has something quite like it, which is fantastic. As you obviously know, our numbers have dwindled over recent years. I would love us to be able to regrow those. It's a big part of what we do, and the closer we can have, it doesn't suit all specials, but the closer we can have specials to neighbourhood policing work, the better. I know we've got some changes going on in our specials leadership at the moment, and one of the things I do want to discuss is about how we refresh our specials constabulary, so get more recruits and get them better connected into the service we deliver to London's communities.
And of course, as you were coming in the evening tonight, you saw some of our amazing voluntary police cadets.
Yes.
So the question for me, it answers the question about more young people. Our voluntary police cadets are more diverse generally than the Met per se, and actually finding a route from cadets to special constabulary or cadets to regulars could be an interesting development, I think, in a different world. I think that is us come to the end. We are, however, going to treat you to an amazing reception. I'll let you be the judge of that probably after the event. Sir Mark's just going to do a little bit of work with the media, but please join us for a reception. We'd really like to continue this conversation with you, both Sir Mark and I, and members of our senior leadership team, who will be so critical to the success. They will be amongst you. Thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to continuing the work and conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.